You know, it's funny, when you watch prepping channels, you get the impression that the only way to safeguard your life during an emergency event is to buy a bunch of expensive, cheaply made products from China, usually electronics. In this video, we're going to talk about something very different. In this video, we're going to talk about how these could save your life. And these don't cost anything.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Not waiting, better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything.
Okay, so let's go. First off, I want to thank a lot of new people who are new here to this channel. Usually when I release a video, and imagining this one will be no different. Whenever I release a video, that's when a bunch of people unsubscribe from my channel. But the last video, which had a bunch of unsubscribers, also had a lot of comments from new people that I hadn't heard of before. So there are either new people coming to the channel and they're just not counting as new subscribers, or they're new people that are interested in commenting and talking about different topics here. And that is why I want to do this video, because the last video I did was about nuclear war related stuff, having a shelter, having some kind of a plan if there was ever some kind of a radiological event like that. And there was a lot of interest in that, and despite the fact that it was another one of my massive unsubscribed videos, it seems like people are interested in this topic. So I wanted to follow it up a little bit with these things. What are these things? Well, these things are going to be irritating to this whole video. They're kind of loud. Well, first off, what are these things? I'll put them down. These are lists, action lists. If there was ever an event where myself and my family needed to go into the shelter, or felt that maybe we needed to go into the shelter, and I think you'd want to err on the side of caution. If there's a chance something might be coming your way, better to hop into the shelter and have it been a false alarm than to have not. You guys know the end of that story. If that event were to come up, I'd imagine, even though we've done some basic run-throughs of what we need to do before we go in, I would imagine that there'd be a fair degree of anxiety and stress, even in myself. And these are action lists for what to do before you're going into the shelter. I think that's a really critical thing to do if you are making those kind of plans, because there's always tiny little things that you're going to forget to do. I'm going to go through these lists. My lists aren't the kind of thing that you would want to copy for yourself, because I've got my set of situations, you have your set of situations. They're not exactly the same. I think that if you listen to my list, you'll probably get some ideas for maybe corollaries in your life, like, oh, Praxis was doing this and that reminds me of this thing in my life, I'd want to make sure I did that. So that's why I'm going to kind of go through these, not because I think there's any sense of you guys copying them, but because get your brain juices flowing. If you think that there's anything that I've missed on my list, please leave it in the comments below, because I'm always developing these, and these are beautiful right now. I've got them all laminated, and I don't own a laminating machine. I just have packing tape, and I put packing tape across it on both sides. They're beautiful. They got a little grommet here. I've got these little lanyards, and I'll explain why that's there in a little bit. So I put a lot of effort into this, and this is probably the third version, and every time I think of some new thing, there'll be a bunch of notes that I add to these things, and then once it gets to a critical mass, I'm like, okay, I think I got to make another one of those. And I feel bad because I put so much effort into making them look nice, and it's important to have them be very clear and easy to just glance at as you're going through. Anyway, let's cut to the chase. First off, why do I got this on here? Well, the reason for that is this, because a lot of the things on this action list involve using your hands, and I don't know if you're like me. If you are like me, you're the kind of person where if you've got a list or something like that, and you're doing things, or oh god, this noisy little lanyard. There we go. You've got a list in your hands. You're doing things around the house, and you're walking around. You have your list. You put it down. You're doing this kind of thing over here. You pick something up. You walk away. You left your list behind you. When you realize you don't have your list, you're like, where did I leave that list? And then you're looking for the list. So lanyards. If you're going to do something like this, I would highly suggest lanyards. Now, I actually did get this lanyard. This is one of those cheaply made Chinese products. I got it from Temu.com for just a couple of dollars. I got a whole pack of 10 of them. So I guess I did spend a little bit on this, but I mean, honestly, you could just use a string or something like that. This was just I really wanted to pimp it because there's actually something else that's going to clip onto here. We're going to get to that a little bit later in the video, actually pretty soon, because it's one of the first things on my list. And let's go through the list. Let's cut to the chase. So first thing, and you may be able to hear it here in this space right now, we have a air exchanger that runs for the house, and it's constantly bringing in, not constantly, but like intermittently is the proper word to use, turns off and on throughout the day, intermittently bringing in fresh air into the house. It runs through a filter outside, but if there was ever a radiological event, I don't want to have the air pump bringing air into the house if we're not going to be here. If we're going to be in the shelter, there's no reason to have that running. It's also running using up our battery power. We here in our house, we live on kind of an off-grid system. It can pop back to the grid if we have like a week of clouds or something like that. But it's a solar power system. We have batteries here, and I don't want things running in the house that are sapping power away from our batteries that we want to just entirely use for purposes in the root cellar, fallout shelter, whatever you want to call it. So the first step here is to close the air vent, which is above my kitchen sink, which is over there. So first thing, I close off that air vent. Second thing, I shut down the wood stove, because the wood stove is also something that's bringing air into the house and cycling up. Now we have an outside air adapter for this. It's a little 3-inch vent that enters into the butt end of the wood stove, which I'd highly recommend if you're ever going to do a wood stove. Get an outside air adapter, because they need to have every bit of gas that goes up the chimney. Well, it's not technically speaking true. You need air for combustion. That air gets drawn into the wood stove. The air goes up the chimney, and that air in your house that's getting used for combustion has to be made up, so you get like leaks around all your windows and doors and everything like that. If you have an outside air adapter, all the air for combustion is just coming from outside, from a specific source, and you're not creating all those leaks in your house. Now the air for this wood stove comes from the greenhouse. We have a pipe that goes down under the ground, under the floor here, under the slab. It's a big 8-inch insulated thing that I made because it's cool air running through it. It goes under the floor out to our greenhouse over here, and that's pulling air into the greenhouse. I don't want to be pulling air from outside, which may have radioactive dust in it, into the greenhouse. Now, is the greenhouse going to be like a pristine environment after a nuclear event? No, it's not, but why bring extra in? So that's another thing, shutting down the wood stove. Also, what if the wood stove's going? What if it's running? You want to shut everything down, so you just cut the thing off and have it stop running, because if you ever operated a wood stove, like what if I just put in a bunch of wood and I'm not going to be here to be manipulating the levers to make sure it doesn't overfire, doesn't get too hot. You want to shut the whole thing down, shut off the fire. Next, we're only 2 items into the list. I'll try not to be so verbose with all of these. Close all the pantry windows. I need a drink. That's tea, not urine. Close all the pantry windows. In the pantry, during the winter time, because it's cold outside, I leave a window open. There's a screen over it so animals don't get in. I leave a window open to let cool into the pantry. I would want to have that window shut, so that's a reminder for me. And this is like, I don't think that you necessarily have a pantry and you do the same thing that we do, but you want to close the windows to your house. You want to make sure, essentially what this section I'm talking about here is doing is it's trying to make it so that all the air that's coming into the house stops, and the air leaving the house stops, because that would have to be made up of something. You want to just seal things up. Even though you're not going to be here, who knows, after the event, there might be better places to evacuate to. There may not. You may end up having to come back in here, and you want to have the least amount of contamination in your environment if you're forced to go back to it. Next thing on the list, and it gets to that extra purpose of these, is getting rad triage dosimeter cards. I keep these in the freezer because if you keep them in the freezer, they're going to last longer. I'll show you what they are. This is the bag that I had out of the freezer. I'll pull it out. I've got instructions for them here, and inside a little Mylar bag, I've got 3 of them. Rad triage cards are little dosimeters, and what you use them for, let me get one out of here, I got 3 of them. What you use them for is telling how much radiation you have been exposed to. I'm going to put a link down in the description below to this and any other products that I might happen to mention during this video. This is, I think these are about $30. It'd be a heck of a lot more if we get closer to a radiological emergency and people start getting worried about it, but I think at the moment you can get them for about 30 bucks. And it just shows how much radioactive energy this has been exposed to, specifically X-rays and gamma rays. And I'll put it back in here so they last a while. There's always a little bit of X-ray and gamma ray, so I keep them kind of sealed up and I keep them in the freezer to maximize their life. Those can get clipped right onto here, and I've got one for me, one for Amber, and one for my boy, and we each can get a separate dosimeter card. I don't think that we would necessarily all be getting enormously different radiation levels, but it's kind of like redundancy. And the reason that I have that is that we are in an environment where we would probably have some time before there would be radioactive fallout coming towards us. We don't really live near any first strike areas. We would probably get peppered, but we probably have some time, and I would like to use as much time as possible to get everything that we can moved into the shelter. And if these cards, which are going to be attached to everybody's little lanyards here, start showing that we're starting to get a lot of exposure, we may decide, okay, it's time to just get into the shelter, or we may decide, hey, there's no exposure here, let's just kind of see how this goes, and maybe we can, dot some T's and cross some I's, or whatever. And it would just give us a general sense of how much time that we have, whether we need to rush more, whether we, can take more time, and it's just additional information. So everyone will get one of those, and we can kind of just check those as we go through. That also brings me to another point on here, is that the information, the checklist items are, I ordered them in order of criticality. And I think I really got to get a good, at least halfway through my list before you get to things that aren't like really critical. But I think that's an important thing to do, is do the really important stuff first, make sure that the stuff that has to happen happens, and then from there you kind of get to some of the other things that you would like to have, but push came to shove and you absolutely had to get into your shelter. You'd rather make sure you've done this stuff than this stuff. I also ordered things according to proximity to each other. I'm closing the air vent above the kitchen sink. I'm closing the wood stove, which is right here. I'm closing the pantry windows, which are right over there. I'm getting these dosimeter cards, which are right below the window. After that, I am swapping an internet cable wire, which is right underneath that window as well. And the purpose of that is that I made it so we can have internet in the shelter. I think it's likely that would get knocked out anyway, but it's as simple as swapping one wire to another wire to send the internet cable out there. So that's one of my steps, and it's right near where I was grabbing these cards. Next thing on the list, right next to that, is again in the utility room, is turning on water to the shelter. It's important to have have water in your shelter. We have water pre-existing in our shelter. We have I think 12 5-gallon buckets of chlorinated water that's sitting there right now. It's ready to go. We have a bunch more 5-gallon buckets that we can fill the day of if something's happening. That's on Amber's list, is for her to go out there, and there's a hose ready in there, and that hose will get water because early on my list, before she gets to her part of the list where she's filling them up, I've turned on the water to the shelter. So if you have a bunch of people with different lists, you want them to kind of synchronize with each other. That's why it's good to kind of do a test through all these things. But you need to have water in your shelter. So we have 3 ways of getting it. There's water in there now, gross stuff with chlorine in it already. We can fill water up the day of, and there's going to be water running in there. So if our electricity system here is still working, again, we have an off-grid system. If it's still functioning, we can get fresh water right out of our well. If that fails, we have the water that we filled up that day. If we didn't get to do that, we've got the chlorinated water if we absolutely have to. Next, right next to the place where I can turn the water onto the shelter, I have an air exchanger, which I mentioned. There's a vent to it. This is the first thing I was supposed to close. And I'm going to turn off the air exchanger altogether. Next thing is I've got some cash in a safe. That is, well, I'm not going to tell you where that is, but I'm going to grab the cash from the safe, and then we're going to take that out to the shelter. And in dark print right here, it says trip out to shelter, so you can see very easily where all your trips out to the shelter are. I've got a couple. Amber's got a lot more of them. Yeah, my boy has a bunch of trips out to the shelter. I felt making them visually pop out so you'd know like when they're coming. And also when you get back from a trip to the shelter, your eye can visually go back to, okay, next thing on the list. What's the next thing that I need to do? So we're grabbing the cash. Now, it's not because we're going to like start up our own little tiny economy in the shelter. It's going to be like, well, I'm sorry, Amber, if you'd like to buy food, I'm going to require, payment for that. It's going to be complete communism in the shelter. It's free for everybody. But there's a reasonable chance that if there was some kind of an event, this house would not be unpillaged when we get out, because there are going to be people that are out who are not going to have the same sense of desire to protect their own health, or they won't believe in radiation or whatever, or after the peak of the radiation's died off, there's going to be maybe some looting going on, and I'm not necessarily going to want to be in this space, but the space could be reasonably safe for somebody to come in and pillage. I want to try to get some stuff out of the house, and I've got a box of cash here, and we want to get the box of cash out into the shelter just for the purpose of not having it be pillaged, if we get pillaged. The best thing, the best defense against being pillaged is living in a place where there's not that many people, and that's our first line of defense here. Okay, so trip out to the shelter. Next, everyone has what's called a special tub. The special tub for River, my boy, is full of toys and games, books and things like that, stuffed animals, critical things like that for a kid. Amber's got her own things in her special tub, and I've got my special tub. And my special tub is being filled up with things that I can't leave in the tub all the time or don't want to leave in the tub all the time. We've got... Here, where I live, it's legal to have weapons, so there are some weapons being moved in. Some more cash is being moved into the safe. More weapons. I have safes with weapons here in the house, and there are keys which are, to somebody with a torch, an acetylene torch, there were keys that they could get to. So I would be removing the keys to the safes as an added way of trying to make it so that people would have more difficulty getting into the safe. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if someone wants to get into something and they have enough time, and they're not being molested by anybody, they're going to get in. But you want to make that as difficult as possible. Other things that go in my special tub. We've got nuclear topic books in our library. I guess it would be a good idea to have duplicates of those, but I'm not made of money, so I've got one copy. They're all together, and those would get grabbed off the library shelf, put into the tub. For entertainment, and let's be realistic, if you're going to be in a shelter for a week or two or more, it'd be nice to have some way of entertaining yourself. I have a hard drive that has just different movies on it. We're going to grab that. We have a laptop that we can play it on that we'll talk about later. I even have a little video game system that's in a bag that we can just grab and bring out with us. So those things all go in my special tub, and then I have another trip out to the shelter. Next thing is the laptop that I mentioned. We've got a laptop that's just kicking around. We'll grab that, and I remind myself, get the power supplies, because it's not going to be good without it, and then trip out to the shelter. And you can see that it's the less important stuff down here, the more important stuff up here. Next, I check to be sure everyone is done in the house. And in running through this, in coordination with everyone else doing theirs, it seemed like it took me longer to do this than everybody else took to do their stuff. So presuming at this point everyone's done in the house, the next thing that I do on here is turn off non-shelter breakers. We have certain breakers in the house which are needed to send power out to the shelter, and other breakers which are just for the house. We're going to turn off everything that is not critical for life in the shelter, just so there's no phantom drains. You got a power supply plugged in here or there, or who knows, something charging or whatever. You just kill power to everything except what we absolutely need. That would make it so that the house would get pretty dark. So that was another reason why I wanted to make sure that this was something that is done once everybody else is done in the house. Last thing, lock all the doors, and final trip out to the shelter. And the last two things before I get out to the shelter is that we have in our shed, we have a bunch of camping bags. I keep my camping bags, which are essentially my bug out bags, readily packed all the time. I've got a modular system where there's a camping bag and a food bag and a shelter bag, and there's all these different bags. And I'm just going to grab all the bags and bring them out into the shelter with us. Now, I don't think I'm going to need a tent in the shelter, but there's all sorts of different tools in there. Essentially, if you can camp, that's like self-sufficiency right there. When you're camping, you're not completely self-sufficient. You need the air around you, and you need some kind of access to water or whatever. And those are things that we're making sure we have access to in the shelter. But all the little odds and ends kinds of things, food, tools, all that kind of stuff. That's all in camping bags, and I think it'd just be a great idea to have them. So it's the curveball. I can't think of everything. You can't think of everything. Just having all this kind of extra materials, so if something comes up, you're like, oh, great, I've got that in my camping bag. So we've got that. And then the absolute last thing, if our dosimeter cards are saying you're fine, don't worry. We've got a bunch of black plastic tarp and what we're going to do is just put that black plastic over our garden areas to try to protect them from having radioactive dust fall on the garden areas and then go into them. Now, if there was a radiological emergency, you're going to want to not live in that area afterwards, but who knows, maybe it's not a choice. Maybe like such a wide area was irradiated that, you know, maybe there's not really anywhere better to go to. Or I can imagine there being refugee crises, you know, after that, with people trying to leave different areas, and you know, there being, you know, walls and, you know, people being prevented from going to safer zones. So, you know, depending on the situation, you should at least hold as a backup position the idea that you may have to stay where you are. So you want to make the best of it that you can. So the idea of covering up your garden area so that there's a little bit less radioactive dust in your garden area, I think is worth doing if, you know, you have the time. And the dosimeter cards are there to tell you whether you do. Okay, next, I'm going to go through Amber's list, because she has important things to do also. First thing, super critical, maybe not super critical, but she's going to grab sprouting containers. We do sprouts here, and sprouts are a great way of getting fresh greens in the middle of winter. You don't even need sunlight for it, and I think that would be a great thing to have out in the shelter, so you have some kind of fresh vegetable getting into you. We're not going to have a refrigerator out there with a bunch of fresh vegetables, so you know, doing sprouting, or continuing to do the sprouting that we normally do, I think would be a great way of getting some of that nutrition into you. And I think it would just be nice to not be eating something that's out of a, you know, dehydrated pack or a can or whatever. So first thing, she's going to grab those quickly, run them out to the shelter. Next thing, this involves livestock and pets. This is something to think about. What are you going to do with your pets? She's going to close the chicken coop door, making sure all the chickens are in. And that's kind of it. That's not a great plan for our chickens. You know, we can't take our chickens into the shelter. They would just turn the shelter in. I mean, the crowing alone would be like literally damaging to our ears in that enclosed space. But that aside, I mean, I guess if that was the only issue, we deal with it. You know, they'd be defecating all over the floor, and you know, the fumes from that, the ammonia would just fill up the space. It would dry, and you'd have the, you know, powdered excrement floating around in the air, and it would be potentially a really awful scene. I don't like the idea that I don't excuse me. I don't like the idea that I don't have a better plan for them. But I don't have a better plan for them. If you have an animal more like a dog or a cat or a fish, I know we have a hamster. River has a hamster. That's one of the items on his list, is moving the hamster out. If you've got that, I think it's more manageable. If you've got like goats and chickens and cows, you know, either make a plan for them or accept that you don't have a plan for them, but it's important to think about it ahead of time. Next thing on Amber's list is that she's going to grab the router from the house. This is the other part of the internet. We have to grab the router from the house that we use, like it's our modem for our Wi-Fi here, and she's going to bring that out to the shelter. Those are the two steps to make sure that we have at least the option of getting internet if it's still functioning. Again, I think it's probably likely that it wouldn't be, but you may as well. Then she's got to trip out to the shelter. Next, she's going to confirm that the chicken coop door is fully closed. When you press the close button on the chicken coop, it goes down really, really slowly so the chickens don't get stuck in it. And there's no sense in having her sit there for literally, like, I think it's like a minute for it to close. So on her way back out past the chicken coop, that's when she checks to make sure that it closed and all the chickens are still in there. Okay, she's going to remove the batteries from the coop door so it doesn't reopen the next day. It's solar activated. And then she's going to return back into the house here, and she's going to close and lock all the windows and close all the blinds. This gets back to the idea of making sure we don't want to have air from outside coming in. Obviously, if there's a window open, we want to close it. You know, you could duct tape around the windows, but we're not going to go to that extent because the amount of time it would take to do that I don't think would be worth the benefit that you would necessarily get out of it. And she's also going to close the blinds. And the reason for closing the blinds is that when you have sunlight coming into a house, it warms the air in the house, and warm air is lighter than cooler air, so warm air wants to rise. It goes up to the top parts of the house. It finds little cracks. I mean, I sealed this house up pretty well with spray foam and everything, but there's always cracks. I mean, just around the windows on the third floor, there are cracks. So the air forces itself out because it's light and buoyant like a hot air balloon, and when it leaves, cold air has to come in, and that's going to bring in dust with it. So the less you can have your house experiencing that, that convection, which is called the stack effect, the less you're going to be sucking in dust. This is kind of a minor thing, but it's easy enough to close the blinds. And also, I guess maybe for looters, they don't know whether there's someone right behind those windows that's ready to defend their property or not. So, you know, it has that kind of additional benefit as well. Next, she's going to grab any of her bedding, you know, stuff from her bed, pack it up, run that out to the shelter. We do have bedding in the shelter. You know, for some reason we weren't able to have time to grab all that stuff, but everyone likes their own pillow, their own blankets, and Amber's got stuffed animals, so she can grab all those and trip out to the shelter. Next, she's going to come back here and get my backpack, and by my backpack, that refers to my EDC pack. I have a pretty big EDC pack. For most people, like when they say EDC, they're talking about like something in their wallet. For me, EDC is a whole backpack. It's like 30 pounds. Some people say that's really stupid because, well, everyone's got an opinion on everything. I like the idea of having kind of a big backpack because, one, it gives me access to a lot of stuff, and sometimes stuff is handy. Most of the stuff in my EDC pack I don't use on a regular basis. I'm usually going in there for like the granola bars that I throw in there, and you know, when my boy gets a cut when he's out playing, I'll have like a little medical bag in there. Aside from that, I don't really use the majority of the stuff that's in there. But what's nice about having a big EDC pack that you wear all the time is that it just keeps you in shape. If you're always used to having a 30-pound backpack on your back, and then you were in a situation where you needed to have a 30-pound or more backpack on your back to go somewhere, you're going to be in a lot better position to do that. So that's why I have a big EDC pack, and it's got a lot of stuff in it, and that's why Amber is going to grab that. Next, she's going to get my phone and her phone, and we have a Geiger counter. We have 4 Geiger counters. 2 are in a dedicated Faraday box in the fallout shelter. 1 is in a universal Faraday box in the fallout shelter, and 1 of them is just here in the house, so that we can just kind of have it on if we were in a situation where it was kind of plausible that there might be an event. I could turn the thing on and just have it kind of measuring the air, so we would be able to tell for ourselves if there was radiation coming through our area, because I'm not counting on local news and media to let me know about something. You know, they may after the fact, or they may early, or whatever, but I don't want to risk my life on, or bet my life on that. So she's going to grab the Geiger counter that we have in here, and the last thing she's going to grab is what we have. It's made by Air Things. I'll put a link down in the description below to this too. It's kind of a handy tool. It is a air quality sensor which picks up lots of different things. I got it specifically for radon because we had some radon in the house, and we use it to monitor that to make sure that our mitigation system is taking care of that fine. But it also monitors other things like carbon dioxide concentration in the air, and that is a critical one when we're in the shelter. We want to make sure that we're bringing in enough fresh air that we don't build up a lot of carbon dioxide in there and, you know, kill ourselves and have the place turn into a coffin. So she's going to grab the air quality sensor and bring that with her. I mean, you can also kind of tell just by breathing whether the oxygen levels are getting kind of low, but I'd love to be able to have the numbers on it as well. Next, after her trip out to the shelter, she comes back in and she's going to go into the pantry and she's going to get a lot of snack foods and use our grocery canvas shopping bags to bring those out to the shelter. Why snack foods? Well, you know, can you imagine you're stuck in a shelter and you've got a really awesome pantry in your house, and you've been, you know, doing like, you know, your shelter food for, you know, a week or so, and can you imagine how you'd start feeling about like, oh man, I know I got some potato chips back there in the house. I'd love it if I, you know, could have access to some of these little treats that are in the house. She's grabbing that stuff. So if, you know, we're in the shelter and, you know, we want some variety, she's going to grab all that stuff. We can't leave that kind of stuff in the shelter because a lot of snack foods, they just go rancid. They don't have a long shelf life. So she's going to grab the ones we do have in the pantry and bring them out. Trip out to the shelter, then she's back in here. She's going to get our radio from the kitchen. We've got an AM, FM shortwave radio in the kitchen. We also have a backup one in the shelter, but the good one is in the kitchen. She's going to grab that and bring it out. And that radio in the kitchen is set up so that all of the coaxial plugs, I've got like antennas that like are mounted up on the house or go off through the woods. I've got a super long shortwave radio antenna. All of the coaxial connections on that are the simple pull-out ones, so you don't have to sit there trying to unscrew them or whatever. They just pull away from the wall, and actually I leave them unplugged all the time anyway, in case there was like a coronal mass ejection or an EMP or something like that that would induce current into the wires. I don't want to have my radio plugged in, you know, while the antennas get hit. So I always leave them unplugged anyway, which I think is, you know, tends to be a good insurance policy. she brings that out to the shelter. Next, she's going to come back in here and she's going to close all the interior doors in the house. Again, trying to reduce that kind of stack effect. This is something you see in a fire related protocols, like at schools and things like that. When there's a fire alarm, all the doors that are magnetically held open close, and the idea is you don't want air moving from space to space. You want to try to compartmentalize, trap the air so it's not moving around. In the case of a fire, it's because you don't want to be feeding air into the fire any more than you need to. But in the case of this, what we're talking about is close everything down so you have the least amount of stack effect as you possibly can in your house. And maybe I'm overstating that, but it's pretty darn easy to just go around and close some doors in your house. And this is down at the bottom of her list after everyone else is done in the house, because if she closes doors and then other people are opening doors, what's the point? Next thing, she's going to just fill up her special tub that we mentioned earlier with just whatever her special things are, and she's going to run out to the shelter. This is her final trip out, it says, and when she gets out there, fill water jugs in the shelter. I mentioned I have a bunch of chlorinated jugs in the shelter, and I have some empty jugs, and the idea is that we would want to fill the empty jugs with fresh water the day of and never use that chlorinated water, maybe for bathing or whatever. We probably use that for bathing, but ideally you wouldn't be drinking that. I know that's me sounding kind of, I don't know, I probably sound like kind of a prick about that, but when you're not used to municipal water and you go in and you go into a city or a town and you're drinking chlorinated water, it honestly tastes like you're drinking out of a hot tub. It's really, we don't like it, and I tend to think it's probably not that good for you either. Not to be libelous or anything like that, but I'll just say that chlorine is a chemical which is toxic to life. That's why it's put in the water. So I don't know, it stands to reason that at least on some level, putting a substance in your body which is by design toxic to life probably isn't good for you. Maybe it's below the threshold of necessarily being bad for you, and certainly I think it's better than some of the things that were in public water prior to it being put in. So, lesser of two evils, yes, sure. But if you don't have to choose between these two evils, and there's this really nice thing called well water, go with that. So she's going to fill up jugs with well water, and hopefully this never happens, but if it did, hopefully we would be able to fill them up that way. Next, the boy. He's got a short list, but it's important for a couple of reasons. One, he's doing some things that are actually useful, and the second is, I think, even as a kid, in an event like that, the last thing you want to do is just kind of stand there twiddling your thumbs, watching everybody else run around. I think giving someone something to do is, I think it's just emotionally helpful. And healthy is the word I meant to use, but also helpful. So beginning at the top, moving blankets, pillows, and any of his stuffed animals from his bed out to the shelter. Take a trip to the shelter. Next thing, he gets his hamster in the cage and his hamster food, and he brings it all out to the shelter. So get your bed, get your hamster, get out to the shelter. Next thing, he's going into the refrigerator, and any kind of perishable food that he wants to grab from the refrigerator, he just starts filling up our canvas grocery bags and hauling that out to the shelter. And this is, again, one of those things where it's like, what if you had like a beautiful cantaloupe or something like that, and you're eating dried canned fruit, and you're like, oh, there's that cantaloupe in the fridge, I just wish you could get that. So, he's grabbing things like that. It's going to probably be more than we can deal with, and a lot of it's probably just going to get hucked out the door. But yeah, at least you got the option if it's out there with you. And that first day, I know whenever I go camping, I'll bring a cooler, and my cooler is it's good for 3 or 4 days or so. It'll keep things cool for 3 or 4 days, which I made DIY myself, just out of 2 inches of urethane foam on the sides. It's the weirdest thing. I made it essentially out of trash left over from a build, and it works better than most commercial coolers I've ever seen anyway. But at the beginning of a camping trip, I'll eat all the stuff that's in the cooler first, because you got to use it over the first 3 or 4 days, or you lose it anyway. So we probably do the same kind of thing. Eat all the free food first. Next, this is actually something that I should be removing from the list. Move broom to near the solar panels. We have solar panels on the house that power the house, and the house's system can power the shelter, but the shelter also has its own independent solar electric system, which is run off its own independent solar panels. And if it was in the middle of winter, or if they just got debris on them, I would want to be able to go out and sweep them off of snow or debris or whatever if we needed to keep electricity going into the shelter. Obviously, I would not want to do that in the first couple days if I could possibly avoid it, but it's good to have the option and want to have a broom out there. But then the reason I mentioned that I'm going to be removing this is that someone in the comments of one of my previous videos where I mentioned this said, it's kind of stupid. You should probably just have a broom out in the shelter ready to go. And I mentioned in my previous video how I listen to people's comments, and if they're good, I adapt and I change and I listen to them and make my plans better. Anyone who's smart does that. It's the idiot people that think that they know everything and have nothing to learn from anybody and don't want to listen to anybody's critiques of anything. It's the smart people that always know they always have something to learn, and I like to think that I'm one of those people that always got my ears open. And that was one thing that they were absolutely right. That was so stupid. I've got brooms all over the house. Throw an effing broom in the shelter and be done with it. So I got to strike that off his list. Next thing, this gets back to his fish. He has, his pets. He has a fish. We're not going to bring the fish out into the shelter. The fish is up on the 3rd floor. It's pretty far away from the ground. Our roof is heavily sloped, so radioactive fallout would probably fall off the roof anyway. The fish is inside of water, and water is a reasonably good blocker of radiation. And also, it's a fish and it'd be really difficult to move. Anyway, he is giving his fish one 2-week feeder tablet, this kind that you can get if you go on vacation. I got a pack of those. We don't really ever use them when we go on vacation because usually Amber's here when he and I go camping. But we have those 2-week feeder tablets specifically if we ever needed to go into the shelter. He'd grab one of those, put it in for his fish, and good luck. We'll see how the fish does, but it's the least that we can do is give it some food. Next on his list, he's going to grab any last books, toys, and games from his room, and he's going to fill his special tub. He's got one too. Bring it downstairs. He's got a little tablet computer he sometimes uses for games. He's going to grab that, add it to the tub, trip out to the shelter. Then he's going to carry any chickens back into the coop. He tends to be the one that the chickens are most friendly with, so he's the person that if the door closed and some chickens were left outside because it's happening in the middle of the day and they didn't want to be inside the coop, he's going to grab the chickens, he's going to bring them into the coop, and then that's his final trip out to the shelter. So those are the lists that we created. I think everyone is going to have their own list. This is our set of actions that we've created based on our unique circumstances. Depending on whether you have a plan where you have your own dedicated shelter or you have some kind of public shelter or a public space in mind. And this is something that I should have brought up in a recent video where I was talking about, you need to have some kind of a plan. And I think I said something along the lines of, if you're not going to build your own shelter, it's like, I don't know what you do. And I didn't really mean that literally. I think what I meant was that, if you don't have the enthusiasm to put in the effort to build your own shelter, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's kind of more the way that I meant it. There are lots of other things you can do. One of them is, there are public shelter spaces. Now, there's upsides and downsides to those. The downsides, I think, are pretty obvious. You've got a lot of people there, and, Hurricane Katrina, Superdome, you know what can happen when there's a lot of people packed into a small space during a stressful situation, and usually the government's plans for people are not adequate, in emergency situations. The government, I don't think that they're usually malevolent, but it's, you can't be everything to everyone, and when you try, you end up failing. America tried being everything to everyone as being the world's police, and if you're going to be completely non-cynical about it and forget about we were just going there for oil or whatever, if you want to be completely non-cynical about the idea, and it's like the Americans wanted to do the best that they could for the world, and I'm not saying that I am completely non-cynical about it, but even if you were, even if you looked at that situation as though the Americans had only the best intentions in mind for people around the planet, the reality is, you can't always be all things to all people. And sometimes when you try to be all things to all people, or you claim that you could be all things to all people, or that you always got people's backs, when in reality you just can't, you can kind of make things worse by giving people the impression that you've got their back, when in reality you don't. So that's the downside of public shelters, is that a lot of people might think that there is going to be more support there than there really would be. And you got all the personality conflicts. But there are upsides of public shelters. Is a lot of them are in pretty good spots. You know, they're really deep underground. Like if you have like a parking garage or something like that, that's really deep underground. Now, in terms of air and ventilation, a lot of these places I don't think have really thought that through very far. But there are really pros and cons. So whatever your plan may be, whether it's a personal shelter or you're kind of gaming out these different buildings, different structures that you could use for that purpose. It's important to have some kind of a plan, and it's important to create some kind of an action sheet or an action list of some sort so that you can execute your plan, because there's always going to be all sorts of little bits of minutia. In fact, just as I was going through this list, we've only recently started locking up our shed where I keep my camping bags. And as I was reading this to you guys, I don't know if you saw my eyes kind of zone out for a moment there, but it occurred to me that those camping bags are locked in the shed, and the keys to the shed are in the house that I just locked before I went out to go to the shed. So, there's all these kind of like little details, you know what I'm talking about, where like the tiniest little thing, granted, I just come back into the house, I unlock the house and I get the key and, whatever. But let's say your plan involves driving somewhere and you forget some critical item. Like, I don't know what that might be. You have to kind of game out your own scenario, your own situation yourself. But, let's say you drive an hour and it's like, this one thing, we forgot this one thing. Maybe someone's medication, like some critical medication or something like that. It's important to have lists for all these tiny little things, because just on your average normal day, I don't know about you, but I can be pretty forgetful. Like I said, I'll be doing a project around the house and I'll have like a list or my diagram of whatever I'm building or working on with my dimensions and everything, and I'll put it down somewhere, like totally forget where I put the thing down. The more that you can get rid of, the more that you can build into some kind of an action list, the more you're going to really save your butt. Can you possibly imagine being in that kind of a scenario where it's high stress and every little decision is life or death, where you got to get this, you got to get that, you got to get this other thing, and just forgetting one thing, man, you got to have a list. So create some kind of list for yourself. I'd highly recommend lanyards, so you can't lose your list. I'd also highly recommend getting yourself some of these cheap dosimeters, and I say cheap, but they're cheaper than other radiation detection devices, and they'll at least give you some kind of a sense of whether or not it's like you're done. You gotta move. You gotta do whatever you're gonna do or not. I know there's still a lot of controversy about what's the best kind of radiation detector to have, and whether or not useful radiation detectors are even available to the public. Ultimately, I think you just gotta accept the limitations of your situation. You gotta do the best you can with what you have, and always aspire to better. Never settle with what you've got. Well, it's not necessarily a recipe for happiness, is it? That's an important topic, I think. There's a difference between never settling and never being happy, and that is, never settling doesn't mean that you have to be unhappy with your situation. Never settling just means you enjoy the journey, enjoying that journey of improving yourself over time. And that's a real difference, I think, between the idea of, man, this is such a big problem with our society right now, where people have realized that the idea of always wanting to improve yourself can lead to so much unhappiness if people don't realize that the journey can be enjoyable. If people's lack of ability to be here when they're here causes them unhappiness, our society, instead of teaching people to enjoy the journey and find meaning and reward out of that journey, people have, in our society, I think largely have said that, well, don't worry about that. You're already perfect right where you are. And I think that is poisonous to our society in a lot of ways, that people have become complacent and have dropped the idea of improving themselves in favor of just choosing to believe that everything is fine the way that it is. And God, as preppers, I think the fingerprints are all over our society in terms of that, in terms of the idea of people always wanting to think things are fine. It's like whatever my my cardiovascular health is, whatever my BMI is, or whatever. That's fine. I'm happy with it, and I don't see any reason for being healthier or improving that kind of situation. Or the same thing with people's emergency preparedness. There's no reason. People have abandoned the idea of wanting to improve their ability to cope with disasters by saying that that goal of being self-sufficient or more self-sufficient is, who even wants that? You're perfect just the way you are. And the result of that is things like Hurricane Katrina. One of the biggest reasons that I host my channel is that I firmly believe, and I think that this is logically irrefutable, that the more prepared people you have in a society, the less bad things get during an emergency situation. And the analog I always use is if you lived in a village and it's kind of cut off and it's just your village and an emergency strikes you, would you rather be the only prepper in that entire village and everybody else is crazy desperate, or would you rather that everyone in that village is prepared? What's going to be a more pleasant scenario? Of course it's going to be the situation where everyone's prepared, or half of the people are prepared, because if you have 99 people all depending on one person's provisions to sustain them all, I mean, it can never work. If you have 50 people depending on 50 other people, you know, okay, yeah, maybe that's kind of plausible. The more people we can get in society into prepping and preparedness, it's not just something that I do to try to help other people. I get an enjoyment out of that, and it makes me feel good whenever I feel like you know, one of my videos has helped someone. That's why I love hearing you guys' comments when you think one of my videos has been helpful to you, or if you think it's stupid, I always appreciate those as well, as you know. But you know, I definitely enjoy that. But beyond that, I think it's really important for myself, for my own personal selfish situation, to try to make as many people around me be more self-reliant as possible, because, well, my fallout shelter is built for 3 people. And I've got neighbors, and, you know, I really like my neighbors, but it's, you know, one of those situations where, like, you know, if I had a bunch of neighbors all wanting to use my fallout shelter, I don't know that I could keep up with the air intake to keep us all, like, you know, oxygenated. And it becomes one of those scenarios where, like, you know, you sacrifice everybody to try to save everyone. Again, getting back to the thing about U.S. foreign policy, you know, when you try to be all things to all people and pretend that you can be all things to all people, it can turn a bad situation into an even more disastrous situation. You can take a situation where you have 3 people surviving and you make 0 people survive because you overextend yourself and you over-imagine your abilities to achieve things. So anyway, I rambled on long enough about that. I hope you find this stuff inspiring to make your own plans, get your own action lists together. Whatever you do, whatever your situation is, thinking things through, gaming things out, getting things down ahead of time is always a good idea, because the worst time to think about this stuff is during the emergency event itself, because your options are going to be more limited and your brain's not going to be functioning at full capacity because you're going to be thinking about other things. That's it. Thanks for watching.
Hey YouTube preppers, if you enjoyed this video, here's another one that I think you might like. But before you click on it, I wanted to take a moment to thank all the people on the right-hand side of your screen. They help to support all the work that I do here over at patreon.com. If you'd like to join them and get your name added to the list, the link's below.